All yours,
all
Charisma.
mine. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to Harlem, everyone. How are we doing today?
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Charisma Dezzoni, and I'm a proud daughter of Harlem. Excuse me if I'm a little sketchy. I am nervous in front of large groups. I was actually raised here in Harlem by my grandparents. They were actually business owners here. We had a business on 138th Street and 7th Avenue, and I've been fortunate enough to follow in their footsteps. I'm actually a small business owner myself. I actually have a business around the corner, not too far from here. We have a drug testing business, which is an MBE, and we work right here in the neighborhood with our folks. Now, as an owner of a business, I'm a boss of 4 people, and although the business is small, we get a lot of work. We have post-accidents, we're doing drug testing around the clock, and so I don't have a lot of time to waste, and that even includes election day. And who can agree with me, you know, your day is busy, even if you're not a business owner, your family, just life, right? So until a few years ago, I actually used to work the polls here in the neighborhood. It wasn't perfect. We had some bumps. We had a little occasional lines, but things were never like it has been in the past couple of years. It seems like voting is becoming more congested. You know, people want to get out. We want to hear, you know, people's votes. We want to hear the activity, their message be heard through voting. But each year or every time it comes to vote, it's just more and more of a headache. It's, you know, so where I am in my community, I live in Esplanade Gardens. If anybody's familiar, it's about 20 blocks here. It's a Mitchell-Lama-owned development. We have 6 buildings, 27 floors. There's about 14 apartments on each floor. There's a lot of people. And we also have voting on premises. Now, it's not just voting for the persons who live in the community of Esplanade, but there's also surrounding buildings. So it gets very congested on voting day. And particularly the last voting in November, it's probably about a room that holds, about this size, that holds mainly about 125 people. What would have normally taken me about 15 minutes to 20 took about an hour long. It was frustrating, and I'm a technology-driven person. I got straight to my phone and just started texting while I waited online. And my biggest concern was probably for my seniors, because in Harlem we have a very large population of aging persons. Now, I'm healthy, I'm young, I won't, you know, disclose how old I am, but I'm old enough, you know, but I'm healthy and young. And standing doesn't bother me, but I'm concerned about the other people because it can become very discouraging when people have to wait. And even for our younger folks, because they may not understand the emphasis of what it is to get out there and vote. So they'll, you know, we don't want people to leave. So congestion only causes confusion. So if we keep this up, we're going to see more people being discouraged and frustrated, and they'll stop coming to vote, and that's the last thing we want to happen. So that's why I'm so thankful that everyone here helped to win early voting in New York. All right? It means people like me, people like my employees can have an easier time voting. We can go out on the weekend. We can go out during lunch, at our lunch breaks, whenever it's convenient for us to be able to go take the time to schedule to vote. And it even means that my seniors and people who can't stand in lines on a busy election day can pick a less crowded environment and take their time to go vote and just get it in. I don't think that I want to be able to, I don't think that I could or want to handle another election year like last year. I hope I don't have to. I actually don't want to. I'm super excited that something in life is actually getting a little bit easier, and I want to make sure that we get it right. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my mayor and your mayor, Bill de Blasio. Thank you.
You didn't seem nervous at all. You know? I said, Charisma, that's your version of speaking in front of a crowd and feeling nervous. I'd like to see when you're not nervous. You look fantastic job. Charisma, thank you. And thank you for making really clear, really plain what New Yorkers are saying all over the 5 boroughs. It's just too hard to vote. It is something that no one looks forward to. They are worried that it's going to be not just a hassle, but the kind of lines, the kind of breakdowns that make it impossible to stick around and do your civic duty because you're late for work or school or whatever it is. It's become commonplace that people assume voting's not going to work out. And that is discouraging people from showing up to begin with. And that's exactly the opposite of what we would want. What Charisma's talking about, I can't tell you, Charisma, how many New Yorkers have said the exact same kind of thing to me. That they go there and they thought things were supposed to be getting better. And the last few years, I don't know what's going on, but it seems to have gotten worse and worse. And the lines that now can be an hour or more in too many places, directly discouraging people from participating in democracy. It's the exact opposite of what we should want, and it makes no sense. So I'm here today to say it's fantastic that the state legislature voted and decided we should have early voting. But if we get the same old mistakes and the same old excuses from the Board of Elections, then early voting is not going to work either. And we have to be honest about that. You can take a great new idea and put it in the wrong hands and it won't work. So we're saying to the Board of Elections today, you have a chance to get it right. You have a chance to get it right this time. And D-Day is in this November, and November 2019, that's going to be one election. But, you know, the mother of all elections is going to be November 2020. So they better get it right this year to be ready for next year. We have to get early voting right. And we're saying very clearly to the Board of Elections, we'll put our money where our mouth is. Now, are you ready to take up this task? Are you ready to do the right thing? Are you ready to make early voting something that's easy for people in neighborhoods all over this city? I want to give you this letter, sent this letter today to the New York City Board of Elections, and it gives them 75 million good reasons to do early voting the right way. $75 million for 100 early vote sites around the city. I want to be clear, 100 early voting sites means you're actually trying to help people vote, right? 100 sites may sound like a lot at first, but that's basically 2 per council district. So when you think about it that way, it's the least we should be doing. It does cost money, and the state of New York is not paying for it at this moment. We hope to rectify that in the future. But right now, we had to put it into the city budget. But I want you to know that when I thought about all the things that matter in New York City, our democracy matters the most. And this investment of $75 million is worth every penny. But now, my friends, we have a question. Is the Board of Elections going to take us up on this generous offer? Are they going to authorize 100 early voting sites? Or, as we saw them do with our previous efforts to support them, with $20 million for the kind of reforms that every other agency does, and they turn that down, are they going to turn down this $75 million? No. Are they going to leave us in the lurch? Well, I hope the answer is no. But we don't know. They have until Wednesday to decide. So I hope they're listening, and I hope they understand the consequences. Because right now, people desperately want to be involved. It's a time in history that people take very, very personally. And they need to make their voice heard, and they need to make sure their vote counts. And we don't know if that's going to happen unless there's enough early voting sites. So that's what we're fighting for today. And I want to thank all the members of my team who are here, because all of the city government is ready to work with the Board of Elections to get this right. We stand ready to help them every step along the way. I want to thank the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, Bita Malstafi. I want to thank our Parks Commissioner, Mitch Silver. And I want to thank the Executive Director of School Facilities for the DOE, Sal Calderon. All of them stand ready to work with the Board of Elections. I also want to thank the advocates who have been fighting for years and years for early voting, who are, at this point, celebrating progress, but because they are very wise, jaded New York City advocates, they know progress only happens when you see it happen. And we've been disappointed by the Board of Elections before. So you're going to hear from some of them. I want to also acknowledge one, thank him for his great work, Murad Awade from the Vice President of Advocacy, New York Immigration Council. Thank you so much, Murad. So we've seen the lines. We've seen the frustration. We've seen the people just turned away. I've seen it with my own eyes. People in line, and they're looking at their watch, and they're looking at their watch, and they're looking at their watch, and they just can't wait in line any longer. And they can't come back later on. So they've given up their chance to vote that year. I've seen it happen time and time again. I've seen people go into a poll site and say, not again. I can't believe this is happening again, and turn away in anger and frustration. This has become commonplace. And remember when so many voters were taken off the polls taken off the voting rolls with no explanation, no warning. How many people, I'm going to do a test of the group here, how many people have either yourselves or you've met someone who had their poll site changed and they were not informed of it? Okay, seems pretty common. This is all broken, and it can't go on this way. And we're putting the money on the table to make early voting work, but there has to be a will on the part of the Board of Elections. And while they're considering our generous offer, how about they decide to stop suing us because we want to help people be able to vote and provide translation for people who don't happen to speak English well. I want you to know that they should stop suing us because we're going to beat them in court. That's a good reason right there. But they should really stop suing us because all we're trying to do is help New Yorkers who need translation services to understand the voting process and be comfortable going in and exercising their democratic rights. And we've been hearing this from communities all over the city for years, that they've been desperate for more translation services. And the Board of Elections never did it. So the city stepped forward and said, we'll do it. We'll make it happen. We'll do it. And what do we get? A lawsuit from the Board of Elections. So look, I just want to be clear. You know, we say BOE. We say BOE, and unfortunately we don't say it so favorably, because it should stand for Board of Elections, not Board of Excuses. But too often it's been the Board of Excuses. Too often we hear after Election Day excuses why everything went wrong. Too often we hear the next day of all the calamity and people throwing up their hands and shrugging their shoulders instead of saying that this is unacceptable. We know it's unacceptable. We're not going to accept it. We're going to fight to make sure early voting works. With early voting, you really can solve so many of the problems that we've had on Election Day, but only if there's enough places for people to vote. Before a few words in Spanish, just say this. And I don't think I've ever seen a time when people felt so urgently that they needed to be involved. And I know that now people are looking forward next year to being able to decide the future direction of this country. But they're worried that they won't get to decide because they won't even get up to bat. They won't even get up to that polling machine and get to put that ballot in. It is so personal at this point. It is urgent. It's a matter of life and death for New York City voters, but voters all over the country. And we have to make sure that every vote is counted. This could be a matter of our survival. Right. Everything in terms of global warming is on the line. Everything about the strength of our democracy is on the line. Everything about whether we're going to have a fair and equal society, a respectful society, a society that includes everyone, or a society that's only for the few, all that is on the line. People want to vote. They need to vote. Let's make sure the Board of Elections is not the only thing standing in their way. With that, a few words in Spanish. Los neoyorquinos están hartos de las largas filas y máquinas de votar averiadas. Gracias al gobierno estatal, ya tenemos la solución: votar temprano. Ahora le toca a la Junta asegurar que toda nuestra gente vote con facilidad. Let's make it easier for everyone to vote. And you're going to hear now from some folks who have been the front line of this struggle, and the victory in Albany really is their victory as well. And before I turn to the first speaker, our special thank you to two people who could not be here, but they really, we need to shout them out wherever they are. State Senator Zelnor Myrie and Assembly Member Charles Levine. They sponsored this legislation that for years and years had been dreamed of, and now it's a reality. And now, in terms of the city's effort, well, we said over a year ago that we were going to focus on intensifying and improving our democracy in New York City. And we put forward referenda before the people, and the people spoke resoundingly and decided in favor of even more progressive campaign finance laws, and they decided in favor of all the kinds of things that our Civic Engagement Commission is going to do to get the word out to people, make it easier to participate. And they certainly decided in favor of the notion of the city focusing on the quality of our democracy. And that's why we now have a chief democracy officer, because it matters. And she is bringing activism to city government and driving our efforts to make New York City a place where the democratic process works for everyone. Our chief democracy officer, Rini Fonseca Sabune.
Thank you, Mayor de Blasio. And I just want to thank you for championing these issues for years. This has not been a quick process. And even when I started 6 months ago, people said, this is impossible. This isn't going to change. And now it has. And so I want to thank you for your commitment over years to early voting, to same-day registration, no excuse absentee, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Some of these are still in process. They will take time, but it is that commitment that we see from you over the years that makes a difference. And today, the financial commitment to back it up. As they say, you put your money where your mouth is, and it will make a difference for New Yorkers. So thank you, Mayor, for that. And thank you, Charisma, for sharing your story. We have all been there. We all have family and friends who have been there, waiting in line, people who have to leave. A friend of mine with a baby had to take the baby, couldn't wait anymore. You know, a little baby, they have to eat very often. And the baby was just like, no more, screaming. So, you know, they had to go. So that's not acceptable. That's not democracy at work. Democracy is when everyone has the opportunity to make their voice heard, and your voice is your vote, and we have to do better here in New York. So I'm happy to be in Harlem for this in particular, and I want to acknowledge the struggle for voting rights over time for people like me. When I interviewed with the mayor and he said, your job is to give every New Yorker a voice, to give all people a voice, I thought about we the people in this in our country and in our state and in our city. And when the people first were constituted, I wasn't included in that group for so many different reasons. And people have fought and shed blood and tears and lost their lives for this right to vote, and we cannot take it for granted. So this is a critical moment in the history of our country, for our state and for our city. And as the mayor said, everybody wants to get involved. Everybody is interested. And what do we see around the country? In Tennessee, in Georgia, in North Dakota, people are making it harder to vote, harder to register. In Tennessee, they want to make it illegal to run a voter registration drive. Illegal. Why? Because they don't want people to have the opportunity to vote. In other states, they're making restrictive voter ID laws because they know who doesn't have an ID. It's low-income communities, it's communities of color, and they don't want these communities to have the opportunity to make their voices heard. So here in New York, we're doing it differently. Here in New York, it may have taken us a little while, but now we're catching up. Now we have early voting, and I want to thank Chair Myrie and Chair Levine and the whole state legislature for making this package happen this year. Finally, it was time, so thank you. And I want to acknowledge and thank and congratulate the advocates who are here, because they have been relentless in this struggle to make this happen and continue to be relentless. And it has been a privilege to watch as this has continued to take shape. And I know that this this struggle isn't over. We all know that. It will just continue. So thank you, congratulations, and I look forward to continuing this partnership to making these reforms a reality. As a reform in theory means nothing. What means something is a reality on the ground. So thank you to all the advocates who have worked on this for so many years. Now, at the state level, we know that reform is in process, and we know at the city level as well. We are, I think, the first city. I've been looking around for the other chief democracy officers out there, and I haven't found them, but if they're out there, give me a call. We are the first city thinking about this in this way. What, as a municipality, can we do to make voting easier, to make sure that everybody gets their voice heard? And so, here we are looking at early voting and looking at what it means. Does having that law in place mean anything without putting it into practice? We have to see what it means on the ground. And we know that early voting, to work right, we have to have locations that are distributed fairly and equitably throughout the city, and that you have to have the opportunity to vote at different locations in your county, that you have to be able to vote on your lunch break or early in the morning or late in the evening, that the hours need to be distributed fairly, and that they have to be accessible. Early voting has to make it easier to vote. And we know if we just get a handful of poll sites for the most populous counties in the state, for millions of people, just a handful of poll sites, that doesn't make it easier. That just perpetuates the same problems that we have seen year in and year out, and that Charisma talked about, and that the mayor talked about. We'll just see it again in a new form. Just 9 days of long lines. 9 days of people frustrated and not knowing. So this is our opportunity to do it better, and we must not pass it up. We must make good on the opportunity that the state has given us to change the frame of voting in New York. And when we see early voting, when it's done right, what do we see? We see young people, as Charisma said, young people are more likely to take advantage of early voting. We see people who can take advantage of communities that they participate on the weekends, whether faith-based communities, community activism groups that they participate in. We can go from the souls to the polls on Sundays, on Saturdays, on Fridays. We have looked at our faith leaders. One of the first things I did when I became Chief Democracy Officer, I went to Bethel out here in Harlem, and they said, we want to go. We want to be able to vote on a Sunday. We see that in the South. That is an opportunity that is now available to us that we didn't have. And so we have to make sure that you can walk. That you can walk from your community center, from your house of worship, wherever you are on the weekend, that you can go with a group of people and say, let's go vote together. Let's make this a communal activity. Let's think about how we can impact our government, our community, our political process together. So when we think about making voting easier, we think about early voting, we think about all the reforms that are in process, and we also think, as the mayor said, about language access. And I have to say, it was like 4 months on the job, and I was like, okay, we're working on this. I worked with Bita from Moya to make language access a reality, and so I was pretty surprised when I got sued for that. That was my first time getting sued, so thank you. And I'm proud. Yeah, exactly. Proud to be a defendant in that lawsuit, because what we are defending is the right of limited English proficient New Yorkers to understand their political process, to be able to cast their vote. We all know it's not easy when you get in there. It's what's your AD, what's your ED, what table do you go to, reading the referendum, which are interesting and important to our democracy, but that's not obvious. Even for the best situated, it's confusing. So we have to make sure we provide that service for people who need it. And to be sued by the Board of Elections for trying to make it easier to vote, I think is just emblematic of this whole ridiculous situation that we're in. So, here in New York City, we're working to give every New Yorker a voice. And that means immigrants, limited English proficient, young people, older people, everyone. It does not exclude somebody because they live far away. They should have an early voting site in that community. It doesn't exclude somebody because where they live or work is not transit accessible. We need to make sure that early voting really takes our democracy to the next step, and we need the Board of Elections to get us there. So this is the opportunity, the $75 million, 100 poll places. Let's make it happen. Early voting in New York City, make it effective, make it a reality, and let's take it to the next level in 2019 and even more in 2020. Thank you, everybody.
One of the best known good government activists and leaders in this city and state who, Susan, I don't remember when we started working together on various causes, but it was a while ago. But you become synonymous with the efforts to open up our democracy and make it work for everyone. I want to thank you for the good work you've done. The Executive Director of Common Cause, Susan Lerner.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. As Bill pointed out, I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York, but I'm also one of the founders of the Let New York Vote Coalition, which has been working tirelessly across the state to bring New York's elections into the 21st century. And I want to thank all of the coalition partners who are here today and our activists for that hard work. Early voting is not rocket science. I think it's time for our city Board of Elections to understand that reform is happening in our state, and that being the 38th state to adopt early voting, we have lots of models for best practices. So they should not just be thinking of the way in which they have run, or, well, we can say run, elections here in New York City in the past. This is a new day with new challenges and some great models. So with early voting, we need to be sure that they have the right hours. They need to be ready for the rushes that are going to come during the week, on lunch hours, and in the evening. We need to have all day Saturday hours for early voting. We need to have the right technology, and we're really grateful to the mayor and to the city for stepping up and being willing to support the need to have a large number of early voting sites that are properly located, not just in the typical locations, but we need to think of non-traditional locations. We need them at transit hubs. We need them in shopping centers. And we need to have a creative approach. A lot of good models around the country, and we're urging the New York City Board to join us in the 21st century and get early voting right. And don't give us the excuse that, well, it's going to be a low turnout election in November. It's not going to be a problem. It's actually a very short time between November to the end of April when we're going to have the 2020 presidential primary, and there are going to be tons of people coming out. So November is the opportunity to test it out and get it right, not to shortchange the people, not to put in antiquated, insecure, expensive voting technology. Ballot on demand, e-poll books, which the city, I believe, is going to help pay for, and our secure and most efficient paper ballots into the scanners. A lot of changes in the law to avoid the excuses that the mayor talked about. Those things have been changed in the law. They're in the process, and there are not going to be any more excuses. So welcome to the 21st century, New York City Board of Elections. We're with you every step of the way. You need to think of the city and all of the activists as your collaborators. And if you have any doubts about what we recommend, you can go to the Let New York Vote website and look at our guide to early voting implementation in your county. Again, it's not rocket science. Together we can get it right. And thank you to the mayor.
Thank you. I felt like saying, come on into the 21st century, the water's fine. Next, a leader and tireless advocate for equality, for making sure there was accessibility always for disabled people, for everything in their lives, but especially that most sacred act of participating in democracy by voting. My honor to introduce Christina Curry, Executive Director of the Harlem Independent Living Center.
I'm tall.
You're very tall.
Okay, let's do this.
Hold that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Just 1 minute. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for having me here. My name is Christina Curry, and I'm the Executive Director for the Harlem Independent Living Center. This is a nonprofit, non-residential agency with 51% of the staff who are disabled. We provide free services to the disabled community and our allies for advocacy, education, concrete services, etc. Disabled individuals should not have to choose between going to work on time and voting. As a person with, thank you. As a person with multiple disabilities, it can be challenging just getting to my designated polling site. I always feel as if I've accomplished a major achievement in walking to the location, only to become anxious on arrival due to the number of people waiting to vote. When I say anxious, I mean, really? Am I going to get into this building? Am I going to be able to vote that day? Because the lines can be crazy. As you see, I have an assistive device that I need to walk. It is not there for me to use to stand and wait for an hour or two. It's not possible. If early voting is an option in other cities and states, why is it not possible in New York City in 2019? It would be great, not just for me or other disabled people, but all New Yorkers to decide over a span of 10 days when we want to vote and possibly go on a day that's not scheduled as a work day. But the Board of Elections is only providing early voting in some currently non-disclosed locations. Does this mean I need to take a train and a bus to vote early? I already have issues with mobility. Let's not make it harder for me and others to vote. Having the option of early voting could make a huge difference, not just for me and the community that I serve, but all New Yorkers. Thank you.
Take it slow coming down on that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be fun for me to trip now.
I got you. I got you. Okay. Very good. Thank you so much, Christina. I really loved when you said a currently undisclosed locations. That sounds like the Board of Elections. How many of us have been told to vote at a undisclosed location over the years? Or inaccurately disclosed location. Finally, I want you to hear from Rod, and again, thank you for your great work with the New York Immigration Council and your advocacy on behalf of immigrants in the city, but also your advocacy for a better and more inclusive democratic system. My pleasure to introduce Murad Awade.
When I say early, you say voting. Early. Voting. Early. Voting. Early. Voting. Okay, we do one more, and let's show folks we're from New York and that we're loud. Early. Voting. Good job. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Murad Awad. I am the Vice President of the New York Immigration Coalition. First, I want to start by thanking the mayor for this amazing announcement of $75 million to be invested in early voting. At the start of this year, New York was one of only 13 states without in-person early voting. With some of the most arcane voting laws in the country, it's no wonder New York consistently ranked near the bottom for voter turnout. We know what works to turn out people to vote. Thankfully, this year, the state legislature took action to reform how New Yorkers vote and bring our voting laws into the 21st century. A 2010 U.S. Census Bureau survey found that the most common reason for not showing up to vote was not having time in your day. Early voting works by providing more opportunity, and it's popular. In 2016, more than a third of the voters nationwide cast their ballot before Election Day. Imagine that. Early voting helps people and everyone. Early voting helps everyone, but especially working parents, caregivers, voters with disabilities, and those with unpredictable work schedules. It must be done right. Early voting means that nothing unless the polling locations are convenient and that there are enough of them. The state budget included $25 million to help cover costs for early voting. The New York City Board of Elections must use that money to open as many polling sites in our city in addition to this $75 million. Although state law requires only 7 polling places per county, it is also recommended at least 1 early voting center per 50,000 registered voters. That means New York City needs more than 100. I'm going to say that again. New York City needs more than 100 polling locations. Too few sites will mean the same overcrowding and the same issues we see every election day. In 2016, we saw the Board of Elections purge hundreds of thousands of voters. In 2018, we saw them hinder language access and sue the city. They sued the city to remove translators from the polling locations. And every single year, we consistently see machines breaking down and a lack of regard for accessibility compliance. The New York City Board of Elections must do better. Let's not recreate Election Day problems for early voting. Let's get it right. Early voting must go beyond the minimum standard and open 100 voting locations around the city. The Board of Elections must ensure every poll site is accessible and ADA compliant. Work with communities when choosing early voting locations. Ensure conformity among polling sites with proper staff. I'm going to say that one again. With proper staff and equipment for each site. Allow language access inside polling locations. Invest in technology and equipment so we can have an election without broken machines, long lines, and headaches. Now we have the funding and the technology to make early voting a success. We need New York City's Board of Elections to do the right thing and provide New Yorkers with enough polling sites to cast their ballots. And I want to thank the leadership of the city, but also I want to thank someone who has been the leader steadfastly in making sure that we continuously fought for and now have won under her leadership, Susan Lerner of Common Cause, who for the past 10 years, this just seemed like a dream and now it's a reality. So I want to thank her for her leadership and thank you all. So, one more time. Early, voting. Early, voting. Early, voting. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you very much, Murad. And now we're going to take questions on the early voting, and then we will take questions on other topics. Early voting and Board of Elections. Rich.
Mr. Mayor, do you expect an answer from the DOE by Wednesday? What kind of an answer do you get?
Yeah, my understanding, and others can join in, is that Wednesday is the deadline that they have to meet to be able to be up and running for the November election, and that's part of what's mandated in the law, and we're all waiting to hear how they're going to handle this. Right now, we have no indication. We've made very clear, obviously I did the budget announcement last week and made clear the funding we were putting in. Reni's testified to the board previously, making clear what we believe is a fair standard. And it's referenced there in the state law, the notion of 50,000 voters per early voting site. You look around the country, different cities have different amounts, but they're in that kind of ballpark. So there's a lot of evidence that this is the number that should be the minimum, but we have no indication yet what they're going to do. Courtney.
The State Board of Elections passed regulations this morning that somewhat spell out how this can all work, and according to those regulations, the city would only need 34 sites.
I mean, I just want to start by saying it just stands to reason that that wouldn't work. 8.6 million people, according to the board's count, about 5 million registered voters. One could debate whether that's accurate, but whatever the number is, it's very, very substantial. And, just think about the geography of the city. If you really want to make it accessible, if you want people to be engaged, if you want people to feel like it's going to be easy and not a hassle, There's no way you could have that few sites.
And then just a quick follow-up. A number of years ago, you obviously offered the Board of Elections $20 million
Yep.
for a number of reforms. They didn't accept it. Why do you think it would be different this time?
Look, I'm still stunned they didn't accept that. And I think there's been a lot of outrage from everyday New Yorkers, from activists, from elected officials, from the media. I don't know how on earth they didn't take that money and make those reforms. And I'm still hoping that there's more reform in Albany that we need, including legislation to change the nature of the Board of Elections, because it's stunning that they could just ignore something like that. There's no other agency I've ever encountered in my life that if you offered them $20 million with very limited fair conditions, they wouldn't take the $20 million. So go ahead.
And that Mike Ryan is the person to see this through.
Look, I am confused why we're not seeing more change. So I've worked with him and I respect him, but I don't know why we're not seeing more change. So I think this is a decisive moment for him. He better step up now and show that he's ready to put in the kind of number of early voting sites we need.
Just jumping right on to that answer, though, I mean, this decision is ultimately going to be made by the commissioners, and that's 5 Republicans and
Yep.
5 Democrats from across the city. Mike Ryan will be responsible for executing it. How do you think, an event like this is going to influence those ultimate decision makers? And do you think there really are more structural changes that need to be implemented to change how the Board of Elections is organized and
Yes.
how those decisions are made?
Yeah, we absolutely need structural change. This current process isn't working. It hasn't worked for a long time. And to begin, the legislature should pass the legislation that has been introduced that empowers the executive director and gives the executive director a lot more independence and freedom to run the agency like a modern organization. That would be a great first step. But I do believe this is going to create pressure. When we were talking about the reforms and the $20 million, you had to be really focused on the issue, perhaps, to understand the ramification, and maybe that's part of why the board thought they could get away with it. But this is a whole different reality. This is out in front in public. People have seen early voting all around the country. They know it's been voted on. They expect it. If the board doesn't give them enough opportunity to vote, there's going to be a firestorm, and that means ultimately that the legislature will have to look at that as well. So, and the legislature, very resoundingly passed this. I don't think they want it to fail immediately. And I want to amplify the point made earlier that this is the only opportunity in November to prepare for seismic elections. The presidential primary in April, the general election in November. The general election in November is going to be, in my opinion, the highest turnout that we have seen in our lifetimes and maybe go even farther back. It's going to be like nothing we've seen before. And they better damn well be ready. So this is the one chance to get it done. Yeah.
The executive budget, you said 96 million.
Right.
And this is 75. So what's
The electronic poll books. So that's the technology for them to be able to convert away from the paper poll books, have it all available in a database. It should be a much easier process.
And then just in terms of
I'm going to let someone else go. I'll come back to you. You go ahead. Who's back there? Sally.
Can you just kind of detail a little bit more what you think these structural problems with the Board of Elections are for people who may not know the kind of strange way it's set up and run?
Yeah, I mean, look, if I've said before, if I had control of the Board of Elections like I do schools or police or sanitation, we would name a professional commissioner. They would be accountable to the people. They go before the city council and have to do oversight hearings. I mean, all the things that are normal with an agency and have been part of why New York City government over the years has gotten more and more effective. But this is not that. This is an arcane structure run by the political parties. And the executive director, and I think, Mike Ryan is certainly a professional person, but I also don't think he has that much power because of the current structure, which is why I think, at minimum, empower the professional manager to run the place. That would be a very powerful step. Who else knows? Marcia.
Mr. Mayor, another issue confronting the Board of Elections is that they suddenly decided to put online all the personal
Yes.
information of voters, not only their names, their addresses, their apartment numbers, but also their party affiliation. I wonder how you feel about that.
I'll start, and I know Susan may have a view or others may have views and would like to welcome that. Look, I don't think they did it the right way. I think they should have given people a sense that they were looking at that option and prepared people for it. I don't think it's a bad thing unto itself. I think it is part of the transparency we actually would want. We would want people to know, yes, you're showing as a registered voter and everything's okay, or if someone went online and didn't find their name there, they'd know something was wrong. So it's not a bad idea. The way they did it, I think, was a mistake because, out of the mist of years and years of not giving us very clear information and purging people in the middle of the night, suddenly everything's online.
But I guess the follow-up question would be this. A lot of people have expressed concern that the law says they can only be used for election purposes, and people who might want, the internet trolls, or want to sell them sweatshirts with
Right.
flags on it, or something like that, could use this information with their addresses, et cetera, or the party affiliations, in this kind of political peril, to go after people.
I think it's a fair concern, but I would still come back to, and again, I don't pretend to be the greatest expert on this issue, but I think the idea is consistent with the notion of a functioning election system, that it's very public who's registered to help people know and to help make sure there's consistency. Because everyone here will tell you the stories of folks who were absolutely thought they'd done everything right to register, and they show up and they're told they're not registered, or they're registered in a party that's not their party, or they're told to go vote somewhere else. I do think the transparency helps to overcome that. Want to add, anyone? No, you don't. No, you're staying out of this. Okay, go ahead.
If Mike Bryan and the board does not accept the $75 million, do you think that he should resign, or there needs to be leadership changes at the board?
Again, I think it goes beyond him, but I think if they don't, there's going to be a crisis. And it will affect the board members, and it will affect Mike as well. That you can't have an early voting system that's not going to work. People will see through it right away. How can you have, the state law sets these minimums. They're just not enough. Seven polling sites for a whole borough of millions of people. It makes no sense whatsoever. So this is a moment of decision for the board. I agree with Susan's point. It's the 21st century. They can't say they can't afford it because we're putting the money on the table. So I think, yes, if they fail to do it, I think it's going to be a problem for him, but I think it's going to be a problem for the whole board.
Why didn't they accept the $20 million you offered?
We've never gotten a coherent answer. We've offered it repeatedly, and the conditions that we're asking for are just really basic managerial improvements and technology improvements. And I don't know if they think it's some sort of pride thing that they shouldn't accept $20 million to make their operation better. But, again, this is why it's arcane and backwards, and it can't go on like this, because there's just nowhere else that people would turn down money to make their work better because of some sense of pride. Anyone else on this? Sally?
For information, do you have an estimate of how many more people would vote if you open these early polling sites?
Let's let Rini, you got a sense of that? And this is obviously speculative, but
Sure. We looked at other states and how many people participate in early voting. And there's a range. It is like from, 20%. Some states it's over half of people. Yeah. Exactly, votes early. It'll be the first time, and I think we expect around 20%. We'll have to see, and it will also depend to some extent on where the sites are. If you have to travel far and wide to get to an early voting site, it makes you less likely to do it.
Just for clarity, when you say 20%, you mean a 20% increase over when you say you expect
20% of those who turn out.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that 20. So of all those who vote, we would say minimum 20% would take advantage of early voting. But as Rini said, in some states it's over 50%, and it certainly correlates to greater turnout. I mean, you can get, Sally and everyone who wants it, some of the history, but there's no question as early voting was implemented in various states, it increased turnout overall and made it a much easier experience for people. Bridget.
Are you prepared to do anything if they don't accept money?
Yes. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We're giving them, they have 48 hours, and we've made it very clear that here is cash money available. If they refuse to act, we'll look at all our options at that point.
And then in terms of just making it possible for them to do this easily, one of the things the board has asked for in the past is a municipal poll worker plan to allow city workers to work at poll sites, since they, we see ads all over the place, they have a hard time finding people to work at these locations. Is that something that you support?
Look, we're happy to work with them on any approach that will improve things, but exactly why we offered them the $20 million was to be able to improve the operations and support getting folks there who could do the work well. So we'd have any conversation with them, but again, I find it a little contradictory that we had an approach that would start to address that issue while still allowing city workers to do the work they're doing. There wasn't even interest in engaging that seriously. So if they say, hey, we want to improve the caliber, let's do it that way first, I would argue. Yeah.
It is for Susan. You mentioned there were models that you said were pretty good at doing this. Can you explain some of those details?
So,
Come on over so they can get to it.
So again, the vast majority of cities that have early voting in their states have successful early voting programs. Los Angeles, Chicago, Baltimore, Asheville, North Carolina, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Baltimore, Maryland, Boston, Massachusetts, all have successful early voting plans where they use ballot on demand that produces the ballot for the voter as they come in, and then use electronic poll books to check people in, and the ballots are then counted by the scanners. And we see different hours and different arrangements in different locations. In many rural counties, you'll have 1 or 2 early voting places, but they'll be in the Board of Elections or the Election Administrator office, and then in another county office. We are aware of places in Texas and New Mexico, just off the top of my head, who utilize early voting places in shopping centers. So that when people are out shopping on weekends or evening hours, that it's very accessible for them to be able to vote. And we also see staffing arrangements where early voting hours, we see that there tend to be rushes, as I mentioned earlier, lunchtime, right after work, and all day on Saturday. So there are adjustments in terms of how early voting sites are staffed to be sure that there are enough people to handle the surges.
Figure 96 million, so 75 is going to Ryan, the balance is going to update the system?
75 for early voting, and the 21 is for the electronic poll books. Anyone else on this? Yes.
I'm curious about your strategy to come out publicly and pretty strongly criticize the board. Why did you decide to do that versus maybe kind of like the reset button with them?
There's no reset button I can find. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. We've tried. I assure you, before the $20 million was put on the table, was lots of discussion and negotiation. What did they need? How could we help? We put it out there very hopefully, and then we're shocked to see consistently they would not accept it. And all they had to do was do a vote of their board. So, this has been a very troubling reality, and I don't think it's time for pleasant discussion. I think it's time for calling them out and putting the demand on the table, and helping all New Yorkers to know that they can either have early voting that works for them or they can have something less, but there's only one place to turn to know who's responsible. It's the Board of Elections. Yes?
What would your option be if the BOE predictably says, no, thank you, I don't need your money? I know in the past you've said you wish you controlled the Board of Elections.
Amen. No, it has to be decided by the state legislature. Again, I would argue if they fail to make this deadline or they come up with an insufficient answer, it puts even more pressure on the notion of at least passing the legislation to professionalize the board and empower the executive director. That would be a step in the right direction. I think it's a decisive moment for them. They have to act differently, or there will be more and more pressure to change the structure forever. And I think this one's really obvious. And because we're on the verge of an election, which I think everyone understands is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before, I think the stakes are even higher. Have I missed anyone? Yes. Yeah.
So, hi, my name is Zach Brock, and I am an advocate.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I thought you were media. I'm sorry. Press conference for media. I'll be happy to see you after, but we're doing media questions right now. Any media questions? Yes.
Are there any locations that you have in mind for the overrun sites?
I don't have a personal favorite list, but we're ready to help them figure out, if we're doing 100 or 100 plus, which are the ones that makes the most sense and that, would be easiest for people to get to. But you want it to be a reality where people look at it and say, okay, that's pretty easy for me to get to. That's something that I want to do because it's in my neighborhood or it's nearby or it's, by a subway, something that makes it encouraging to people to participate. So we would certainly work with them to figure out that list. Okay, last call. Yes, Rich.
Would you vote early?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as soon as they had a place in or near my neighborhood, I would go there. I think it's a great, great idea. I mean, I have a certain nostalgic love of Election Day, but that my nostalgia has gotten really tried in recent years. It doesn't feel like it used to be. And no, I think I would want to vote early to send a message to everyone what extraordinary opportunity is. Let's face it, one of the other things that happens on Election Day is you plan your day and then something comes up. And there are certainly any number of people who were expecting to vote after work, and God forbid they have to stay at work, or their kid got sick, or whatever it is, and they miss out on voting. So I think one of the reasons that early voting is so popular around the country is it's done, and you can do it on your own terms. So I absolutely will.
Expect to see you on the primary ballot next year?
Very clever segue. Wow. Blew me away with that one. Oh my God, I don't know what to do with that. I think you're off topic. As I said, you'll know soon. We'll certainly look forward to a conversation about that soon. Last call on the Board of Elections issue from the media. Going once, going twice. All right, let's do other topics. Bridget. Look, I'm going to generalize that one for obvious reasons. I think the concern I have right now is for my party. The Democratic Party has to speak to working people, and it has to have a clear, strong economic message. And right now, it's still not clear if that all is going to happen. And one of the most important things about this primary season is to decide who we are once and for all at an incredibly crucial moment in our history. So I will figure out my reality soon, but I'm going to be pushing for that outcome, whatever I do. Willie.
My question is, in your time as mayor, have you ever received what is known as a private warning letter from the Conflicts of Interest Board?
I don't know what that is. So I know what the Conflict of Interest Board is, but I don't know what a private warning letter is.
3 measures that it takes. 2 of them it immediately makes public. Those are fines and public warning letters. You have never received those because they would have been made public.
Right.
The third is a private warning
Since
letter.
I don't know what it is, I can't answer you, but I can have our lawyers update you.
When will I get an update? Can I get an update?
Whenever they get it ready.
The update on these, so what the health department said there's been about 50 summonses so far. What steps are being taken just to make sure that the vaccinations are still happening? And are those people who are getting summons, are they appearing in court? Or are they
Doctor, your moment has come. Step forward. Our deputy commissioner is here, always ready. I'll start and I'll pass to you. First of all, I want to say I think we see some good signs, but we are far from out of the woods. Obviously, we projected that Passover would be a crucial moment because a lot of people would be together, and in the weeks after, we would see what the impact would be. But what is clear is enforcement has been stepped up intensely by the Department of Health, both in terms of violations and in terms of school closures. We have 2 more schools today that we're reporting will be closed down for tomorrow. Violations now are at 57. Those are continuing to increase, and we're going to use every measure that we have to make very clear how serious this situation is. On the good news side, though, we have twice as many children vaccinated this last few months than we had the same period last year. So that is definitely a step in the right direction. You want to give other updates, Doctor?
Sure. So I think as you've heard, our case count has gone up to 423, and Mr. Mayor, you're correct. We've given 57 notices of violations to individuals. I think one of your questions was about fines for those individuals. They're going to go to oath for hearing, and fines will be adjudicated from there. That has not happened yet. The time frame usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get them into the oath hearing.
Getting more and more business for vaccinations, or is it dropping down now? What's your...
I think, as the mayor said, we are actually seeing a really significant bump in vaccinations since the order on April 9th. We've had a doubling of what we've expected for this time of year. In fact, I think we've hit over 1,300 vaccinations given in Williamsburg just after this order. So we're seeing exactly what we want to see. People are responding to the order, and the intent of the order is really to get people vaccinated and to encourage quicker vaccination to hasten the end of the outbreak.
Anything else on measles, first of all? Anything else? Let me just add, that's not on measles, right? Okay, just finish on this, Doctor. Thank you, and to your colleagues, I want to say Department of Health has done just an extraordinary job getting out there and spreading the word, encouraging people to get vaccinated, working with a lot of other city agencies. I want to thank everyone who's been a part of that. And, I've said there's a very small group of anti-vaxxers that have been trying to give people misinformation. But what we see more and more, with the help of a lot of community leaders in Williamsburg, a lot of community institutions, a very clear, overwhelming message from the community leadership that people should get vaccinated, and that is having more and more impact, as you said, from the time of the order to now, which, help me, Doctor, 2 weeks to 3 weeks that's been. What, since the day we gave the order?
April 9th, so we're we're getting to 3.
Okay, so in just under 3 weeks, we've now had, 1,300 kids vaccinated. That's really promising. So we're getting somewhere, and thank you very much. Yes, Willie.
If you have received such a letter, will you commit to releasing it?
I'm not going to get into anything about a letter I don't know about. So again, the legal staff will address it.
Typically sent to the individual, not to the world.
Willie, I'm telling you, I don't know what it is, and that's very helpful.
Well, speak to your lawyers. You mean the city lawyers as well as your private lawyers?
The city lawyers will follow up.
This goes to the individual. You'll check
Again,
with your private.
that's all I have to say. Go ahead. Thank you. I think I answered it. Go ahead. Again, I'm done on that question. Go ahead.
You and the Department of Homeless Services have said that you've been willing to work with Staten Island elected officials who were trying to push for alternative sites for a homeless shelter in St. George on Victory Boulevard. They have been in active discussions with the Salvation Army, trying to secure a part of the Bailey Seton Hospital campus to potentially move that homeless shelter to. And after a meeting with those elected officials and the Department of Homeless Services, the agency said that we're not going to work with them anymore. We're going to go with 44 Boulevard. I'm just curious, what was the rush, and why, if you and DHS have been willing to work with these elected officials, you guys decided to go a different route?
I'm no disrespect to you, but I need to talk to our DHS team to get their rendition of the state of play, and then I'll be happy to speak to it. We engaged in good faith with conversations with the elected officials, but to the question of rush, this idea has been out there since April 2017, when I said we were going to ensure there were shelters in every part of the 5 boroughs that representing the population that each part of the city had in our shelter system. So the notion that there was going to be expanded shelters on Staten Island has been out there for 2 years. Discussions of locations have been going on for months and months. And we are listening always for different alternatives, but that doesn't mean that we're provided with alternatives that necessarily work. But in this case, let me get an update and we'll be able to speak more to it.
Salvation Army comes back and says, the city can have a part of its campus to move this 200-family homeless shelter. Would you consider?
Again, I need to know. I just can't do a theoretical on that one. I'll be happy to answer when I get an update.
On auto fringe benefits.
Excuse me? This is a sexy topic. Okay. Auto fringe benefit. Do you mean like fringe benefits for an auto?
No, for city workers who get city cars
Oh, auto. Okay, I get it. Okay.
AUTO.
Yes.
So there's a curious trend. We looked at some numbers in an article in today's post that show the reporting for the use of city vehicles on income tax returns spiked up after the whole scandal with DOC and take-home cars. A couple of council members have said that there should be an investigation into this. Clearly, there's a suggestion that after the Commissioner Ponte was found to have misused city resources in using the city car for personal purposes, that people were all of a sudden reporting this benefit when they hadn't before. Is this something that you're concerned about?
It's the first I'm hearing of the entire category. So, again, another one I'd be happy to get updated on, have something more to say on. But this is totally a new one on me. Courtney.
The cover of the Daily News today is regarding an accident you had back in 2016. When you were in a car, you left the site of that accident.
I was not driving the car. Let's help everyone here to understand what you're talking about.
Passenger in the vehicle.
Yes.
Is there any regret that that accident wasn't disclosed publicly?
Everything about how an accident is handled is the responsibility of NYPD. So, I don't know enough about their protocols, but that's something to ask them. Yes.
Have you started fundraising yet for your legal defense fund?
No.
Do you have any plans to?
At some point, we're waiting, of course, for the regulations to come out, but at some point, of course, we will. Yes.
Follow up to that question about the news story. Were you aware of a cover-up when that happened?
I don't accept the notion that anything was done one way or another because I'm not familiar with what was done. So if you have questions about, again, I'm just literally, I don't know details of it. I don't know how it was handled. Ask the police department because they handle that. Yes.
Channel 4. Pete Boudier had lunch with Al Sharpton today in Harlem, and he continues to do well in the
That was a fascinating pronunciation. I think you made his name French.
History class.
Okay, there you go.
He continues to do well in the polls. What do you think of him rising to the top tier of Democrats that are running?
I don't comment on different candidates. As I say, I'll make my own decision soon, and then I'll say different things about that race. But I'm not going to comment on individual candidates.
In that same vein, Patch has a story out. There was a flyer at your gym this morning with a kind of tongue-in-cheek telling you, not to enter saying don't enter this gym if you're going to run for president, focus running on the city.
It's a ban on going to the gym if you run for president? Really confused by that.
Apparently it started in for you.
No, I didn't. I don't know about it.
What do you think? Because you talked about you need to go to the gym to stay connected to the people in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Have they talked to you about whether or not you should run?
Yeah, I talk to people all the time. And, as I've said to you guys before, there's all sorts of voices with all sorts of opinions, and many encouraging, and certainly there's some who have critiques, but that's New York City. Who else? Jeff?
Mr. Mayor, do you think, back to the Daily News story, do you think that accident should have been disclosed to the public, especially given your focus on traffic safety and your Vision Zero initiative?
Yeah,
Have you talked to anyone in your detail about why that accident was not reported?
Again, at the time, I'll just say this, all I remember was a very minor situation. I don't know what the protocol is. It does not, the things we're trying to do with Vision Zero, obviously, are protect people's lives and protect people against injury. This was a very minor situation. No one lost their life. As far as I know, no one was injured. So I just don't know what their protocol is, but not something I thought about. Yes?
So it's been 6 months since the New York Oil project was declared dead. The company still has an active lease agreement with the city and has racked up more than $2 million in penalties. I'm just curious, what's going on there? Have you guys received any project proposals? Or is the city trying to revitalize it?
Look, it's a site we can do a lot with for the good of Staten Island, and there's some real interesting ideas, whether it should be focused on economic development, job creation, whether it should be, public space or some combination. But the process really has only begun. EDC has been talking to elected officials and community leaders about what they'd like to see. I don't know if they've put out any kind of formal requests for proposals yet, but that will certainly be coming soon. I don't have a personal view. I would only say I think I want to hear from Staten Island leaders and residents. I think the economy in Staten Island, has been growing in some important ways, and it might be an opportunity to foster that growth. For example, more tech is a good example, but we really have to hear from the community and the local leaders. Who hasn't gone? Go ahead.
Last week, the Charter Commission proposed changing the voting system to a ranked voting system versus current stance. What are your thoughts about that?
They're decidedly mixed, and I'm sure people up here, as soon as we finish, will have their own strong views. So I grew up with a ranked system in Massachusetts, and in some ways I thought it made sense. But what I don't know is sort of, in the way it's been used around the country, what happens? Do more people participate? Do less people participate? Does it make it easier for people of more limited means to run for office, or harder? You certainly could argue if name recognition becomes even more central in that kind of system, folks who have more resources or are better known already might have an advantage. So I really am interested in hearing both sides of that debate and seeing what the evidence is from around the country. Rich.
Mr. Mayor, given the traffic and the drivers in this town, are you glad you're not driving your own car?
I actually enjoyed being a driver in this town, although I will not be one in the future, as I said, because I'm going to not be having my own private vehicle after this job. So, but I enjoyed it. I cannot tell a lie. I mean, some days I didn't enjoy it, but by and large, I was okay with it.
Traffic today, given Uber and Lyft and all of these cars.
Probably worse than even just a few years ago. Yeah, but I'm just being honest. I kind of got a kick out of driving around this beautiful city. Probably I would get less of a kick now, though.
Mr. Mayor, to go back to this issue of the Board of Elections publishing all the voter enrollment data.
Yes.
One of the things that we heard a lot when we reported that last week was concerns, particularly from people who find themselves in vulnerable situations, people who are domestic violence victims or survivors, and just people who felt like they had not anticipated this as an invasion of their privacy.
Right.
So I know you said that in general you support the idea of transparency, but with that idea of the privacy concern, do you have any other concerns about?
Well, that's where I think that's a good, very fair question. I think it fits under the rubric of not that it was necessarily a bad idea, but the way they did it. I think that's a real fair point that should have been taken into consideration. And, thinking about whether there's some kind of opt-out that makes sense. I'm not an expert on this, but I think, again, if you're talking about the general question of making our democracy work, I think there's been so much confusion about who's registered, who's not registered, and which address, that putting that out publicly has virtues. But I think you raise a good point. For some people, that may come with real complications. So I think it would have been better if they had aired the idea first and let there be public comment and then adjusted accordingly for some of the needs and concerns. But I don't think it's a bad idea in terms of, maximum transparency. Please.
The reason the board put this information up when they did was to meet the requirements of the consolidated primary, so people could start petitioning. They needed to make this information available. Their printer wasn't going to be able to get those books in time to pull everything.
Yes, it is.
Now that they have met that requirement, do you think they should take it down?
I don't really know, and I think it's a great question for us to look at. I think it's a fair question. Because of the concerns you raised. So Rini and Deputy Mayor Thompson and others and our legal team will look at that, because I think that's a very fair question. Okay, last call. Going once, twice. Willie.
Question on the Board of Elections. You're a Democrat. You're the city's most prominent elected Democratic official. You're close to some of the heads of the county committees. What have you done to try and work with them to put people aligned with your vision onto the Board of Elections?
I don't think each of them I have different relationships with. As you know, I don't come out of the Democratic organization. It's not ever been the place that was my political origin. But it's less about trying to convince them who to put on. I talked to some of the county leaders about accepting the $20 million. And I'm just surprised that it hasn't happened. I think it's common sense. Yeah, I'm not going to get into individual people, but the point is, I think it makes sense for the board to do it now. And I definitely think it makes sense to pass the legislation in Albany to once and for all empower the executive director so that we can get by all this. Thanks, everyone.